Okay, I want to start today with something that I do not say often enough out loud, and it's this. I used to be terrible at hard conversations, genuinely terrible. I would have feedback to give and I would sit on it. I would sit on it. Instead of, it would have taken 2 minutes to deliver this feedback, 5 minutes for the conversation, but I sat on it for 3 months until it had grown into this big, complicated thing in my head with a backstory and maybe some bad feelings. I'd smile, I'd nod through a conversation, through a meeting, instead of saying a single word to the person that I disagreed with, the person who was talking, the person who actually needed to hear it. And I had a whole list of reasons why now was never the right time to say what I wanted to say. The timing was off, they seemed stressed, I didn't want to be that person. And what I told myself is that I was being patient, I was being generous, even. And looking back, I was just scared. And what changed everything for me was this. I stopped treating that fear as information about whether I should speak up or not. And I started treating it as information about how much the conversation mattered. I figured out why I was avoiding those moments and I figured out exactly what to do instead. And once I did, it didn't just change how people experienced me at work, it changed how fast I moved. It changed the rooms that I got invited to. It changed the doors that opened to me. And it changed how senior leaders talked about me when I wasn't there, I found out. So if you've ever swallowed the things that you needed to say because it felt easier in the moment, I see you. I have so been there, exactly there, more times than I'd like to admit. And I can't wait to hand you what I now know to be true because it changes everything about how you show up, how you're trusted, and frankly, how far you go. So here's the thing that nobody tells you about avoiding a hard conversation. It doesn't actually make the problem go away. It just changes who pays for it and when and how much interest has accrued, relational interest has accrued by the time the bill finally becomes due. So today we are talking about why avoiding hard conversations damages your career. It does it steadily and it does it far more than most people think. We're going to look at the psychology of why we avoid them in the first place. And we're going to look at a piece of research that will probably make you a little uncomfortable, but in a good way. We're going to talk about a leader who built an entire reputation on doing this well. And we're going to end with exactly what to do instead in a way that you can actually use. Very practical, very useful. So let's get into it. Here's what I want you to really sit with for a second. Every hard conversation you avoid does not disappear. It just gets reassigned. Who does it get reassigned to? It gets reassigned to your future self, who now has to deal with a bigger, messier version of the exact same problem. It gets reassigned to the relationship, which erodes a little bit more every time the thing goes unsaid, even if neither of you could point to the exact moment it happened. It gets reassigned to your reputation because, and I promise you this is true, people can feel when something isn't being said. They might not be able to name what it is, but they feel the air get just a little tighter, a little thinner in the room. They notice that little delay before you answer a question. They notice what you don't bring up in a meeting that everyone is thinking about. And I call this the conversation tax. You don't pay it now, you pay it later, and you pay it later with interest. And the currency of this is typically trust. So I want you to think about this less like a single transaction and more like compound interest, the way it works on a loan that you're not paying down. A conversation avoided today costs you very little right now. Maybe a slightly awkward Tuesday, maybe a little tension that you can't name. But if you avoid it again next week and then the week after, that small unpaid balance starts generating its own interest, as in resentment that compounds. And by the time you finally have the conversation months later, you're not paying off the original small manageable account. You're paying off everything it accrued in the meantime. So let's talk about why we avoid these conversations in the first place, because the reasons, they are genuinely understandable, even though the costs are real. Most of us avoid hard conversations for one of three reasons. Number one, we're afraid of the reaction. We imagine that the other person is going to get defensive, they're going to get upset, they're going to turn cold on us. So we run that little movie in our heads, frame by frame, and it never goes well in the movie. So we just don't press play in real life. Second, we're afraid of being wrong. What if I raise the issue and it turns out that I misread the situation completely? What if I come off looking petty? What if I come off looking like I'm just overly sensitive or like I'm making something out of nothing? There's a very real kind of dread that comes with imagining yourself overreacting in front of someone whose opinion of you really matters. And now they're looking at you in a lesser way, or now they're looking down on you, they're laughing at you. And the third one, and this one is really sneaky, we tell ourselves, oh, it's not that important. We downgrade the conversation in our own minds. We negotiate it down to something that we can live with not addressing. It's fine, it's not a big deal, I'll let it go. Which is sometimes true. Some things really are small enough to just let go of. And sometimes it's just a very sophisticated form of self-protection. Dressed up as maturity, look how mature I am. Dressed up as being, oh, look how easygoing I am. Or dressed up as not wanting to make a thing out of nothing. Well, here's what I want to say clearly, because it matters. None of these three reasons make you weak. They make you human. Your brain is doing exactly what brains are built to do, and that's protecting you. In this case, protecting you from social risk, in the same way it would protect you from physical risk. The problem is not that you have this instinct. The problem is what happens when you let the instinct drive the car every time, every single time. The problem isn't that you have this instinct. The problem is what happens when you let the instinct drive the car every time, with no one in the passenger seat asking whether this particular trip actually calls for that kind of caution. So let's get into the science, because this is going to reframe the whole thing for you. There's a concept in neuroscience that I find so fascinating, and it explains almost everything about why hard conversations feel so terrifying, disproportionately terrifying, even when rationally we know that they're not actually dangerous. Researchers studying the brain's threat response system had found that social threats, the possibility of conflict or rejection or disapproval, they activate many of the same neural regions as physical threats. Your brain, when it's facing the prospect of telling your boss something that they don't want to hear, it's not calmly weighing the pros and cons in a calm, orderly conference room in your prefrontal cortex the way we'd like to imagine it is. No, it is sounding a real alarm bell. The same kind of alarm bell that would go off if you were about to step off a curb. The same kind of alarm bell that would sound off in your brain if you were about to step off a curb into oncoming traffic, which is wild, isn't it? Because logically, you know that telling your manager, I believe we need to revisit this decision. Well, it's not the same thing as standing in front of a bus, a moving bus, but your nervous system, in that split second before you open your mouth, it cannot always tell the difference. It registers the threat of disapproval, the threat of conflict, the threat of someone important to your professional life thinking less of you. It registers it and responds with the same chemistry it would use for an actual physical emergency. And this is why avoidance feels so deeply, so bodily reasonable in the moment. It's not a character flaw. It's biology doing its job, doing its very old job in a very modern context. A job that was designed way back when being excluded from your tribe could truly threaten your survival. And it hasn't fully caught up to the fact that your boss disagreeing with you on a Thursday meeting is not truly a life or death scenario. And where it gets really interesting, though, is that this is the part to hold on to, that once you understand that your discomfort is a threat detection system, not a truth detection system, then you can start to relate to it differently, completely differently. The racing heart before a hard conversation doesn't mean don't do this. It means this matters. And my body noticed it before my conscious mind caught up. And those are two very different messages carrying the same exact physical sensation. And here's the piece of research that makes this even more useful. Researchers studying decision making under social pressure have found something paradoxical. The people who feel the most anxiety before a difficult conversation are often the ones who care the most about getting it right, about the relationship, about doing it well. The anxiety, then, it is not evidence of weakness. In study after study, it correlates more closely with conscientiousness than with, say, incompetence. And the people who feel nothing before a hard conversation are sometimes the people who handle it the worst because they haven't actually thought through what's at stake here. So, what does this mean? If your stomach is in knots before you have a conversation, consider the kind of possibility that it's not. So, what does this mean? If your stomach is in knots before you have a conversation, consider the possibility that it is not a sign that you're not ready. It might be a sign that you're exactly the kind of person who's going to do it well, who's going to do it thoughtfully. The people who learn to tell the difference between this is dangerous and this matters, they're the ones who have the conversation anyway, stomach knots and all. I want to tell you about someone who understood this. Let's look at somebody who really, really understood this in a way that most people perhaps could only aspire. Just skip that line. Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo, she's talked publicly about a practice that she returns to constantly. Throughout her career, she made a habit of writing letters, actual, personal, handwritten letters, to the parents of her senior executives, thanking them for the gift of their child. Not a formal corporate gesture that she stuck into a holiday card, a genuinely personal message. Note, the kind of thing that takes real time and real thought to do well. And she did it over and over again across an entire career. I love that story because it tells you something about how she thought about people. But here's the part that directly that's directly relevant to today's episode. She was also known throughout her career for an unusually direct leadership style, especially when it came to having the conversations that most executives avoid. She was known for naming the tension and naming it early, for telling people directly when something wasn't working, rather than letting it fester into a slow erosion of trust that nobody quite acknowledges out loud. And what made her effective wasn't that she enjoyed conflict. By most accounts, she did not. Almost nobody enjoys. What made her effective wasn't that she enjoyed conflict. By most accounts, she did not enjoy conflict. Almost nobody truly enjoys it. What made her effective was that she treated directness as a form of respect rather than a form of aggression. She operated from the belief that the kindest thing you can do for someone is to tell them the truth early enough that they can actually do something about it, rather than waiting until the moment has passed and all that's left is to offer an explanation of what should have been done differently. There's a quote that's attributed to her that captures this so well. The idea that every person deserves the dignity of honest feedback delivered with care. Read that phrase again. Think about that phrase, the dignity of honest feedback, not the discomfort of honest feedback, not the harshness of honest feedback, the dignity of it. That's a genuinely radical reframe if you sit with it. It says that withholding honest feedback from someone isn't actually protecting their dignity. It's disrespecting their dignity. It's treating them as someone too fragile to be trusted with the truth about their own work, their own behavior, their own potential. And that's the posture that I want to borrow today. Not the, oh, I need to have a hard conversation because I'm tough and I can handle conflict, but rather, I respect this person enough to tell them the truth while there's still time for it to matter, while there's still something that they can do with the information. That reframe changes everything about how the conversation feels going in. It moves you from a posture of confrontation to a posture of generosity. And generosity, even uncomfortable generosity, is a much easier thing to walk into a room bringing with you. A client that I've worked with, because one of my clients that I've worked with gives a really great example of the conversation tax actually compounding over time. She was a director at a mid-sized company. She was great at her job. People liked her. And she was stuck in a working relationship with a peer, and the relationship had gone sour, and almost invisibly this happened over the course of about 18 months. It started small. He took the credit for something just once for an idea, and the idea was actually hers. And it happened in a meeting where she didn't feel like it was the right moment to correct the record, so she let it go. And then a few weeks later, he did something pretty similar again. It's just a little bigger this time. But she let that go, and she told herself that she was being a team player, that it really wasn't worth the friction, and surely it would resolve itself. Well, by the time she came to me, 18 months later, what had started as one small, awkward moment had calcified into a damaged, very damaged working relationship. She dreaded her meetings with him. She started looping in extra people just to have witnesses. And she developed an entire defensive communication style just for him, full of CCs and paper trails that she used with absolutely no one else on her team. When we got into it together and unpacked it, what became clear was the actual issue. It was the credit taking. It was the small slights. They were almost beside the point at this stage. The real problem was 18 months of unspoken tension that had now at this point built its own architecture. 18 months of a conversation that should have taken 5 to 15 minutes in month one. And instead, it had ballooned into something that felt, by the time she got to me, almost impossible to address. So we worked it through, and we worked on the structure that I'm going to walk through with you in the next few minutes. When she finally had the conversation, here's what struck me the most. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes to address something that had shaped her entire experience without her even naming it of that job for a year and a half. And she told me afterward, I cannot believe I let that cost me 18 months of my life. That is the conversation tax made completely real. It's not abstract. It's not theoretical. For her, it was 18 months of dread, compounding every day, that really, in this case, a 20-minute conversation could have prevented. So let's get even more concrete about the cost, because we underestimate it constantly the way she did, the way I did for years. When you avoid giving feedback, the person you're protecting from short-term discomfort is actually being denied the information that they need to improve, to adjust, to course correct. you're actually not being kind. You're withholding something that they need, and you're calling it kindness so that it feels better on your end of the equation. Well, that's worth thinking about because it reframes this whole transaction. You're not sparing them, you're sparing yourself, and you're billing them for it later on a statement that they never see coming. When you avoid naming the conflict, it does not resolve on its own. Conflicts, issues, communication problems, they rarely go away on their own. They typically snowball. But what happens is it's going to go underground. And things that go underground in organizations, they don't disappear. They just start showing up again and again. And they start showing up sideways. They start showing up in passive aggressive emails and who gets CC'd on what and who conspicuously doesn't. In the slow, almost imperceptible decision to stop including someone in important conversations because it's just easier than addressing the friction directly. Nobody announces that decision. It just happens, meeting by meeting, until one day that person realizes they're not in the room anymore and they can't figure out where it started. And here's the cost that really lands for ambitious professionals specifically. When you consistently avoid hard conversations, you get to be known informally, but very real, as someone who can't be trusted with difficult moments. And difficult moments are exactly what senior roles are made of. Every level up, the conversations get harder, not easier. If you can't have an uncomfortable conversation with a peer at your current level, then the people above you start to wonder, well, fairly or not, whether you're going to be able to have a challenging conversation kindly, courteously, professionally, but one that needs to happen with a client, with a board member, with an underperforming direct report, with a major stakeholder whose feelings cannot be the deciding factor in a high stakes decision. The relationships that you're trying to protect by staying silent, they are actually the ones that erode the fastest because relationships don't get preserved by the absence of friction. Relationships are built and strengthened by the demonstrated ability to move through friction together and come out the other side still respecting each other. A relationship that's never been tested by an honest conversation, it isn't actually strong, it's just untested. And untested things have a way of failing at the worst possible moment, under the worst possible pressure. So this leads us to a really big word, the word courage. Because let's look at it. Courage is a word that gets used in a way that makes this feel bigger and scarier than it actually needs to be. We tend to imagine courage as this dramatic moment, this white knuckle moment, standing up in the meeting, delivering the perfect, devastatingly honest line, everyone in the room gasping slightly at your nerve. The movie version, the version with a soundtrack. And that is not what courage looks like in practice. Almost never. Courage, in the context of hard conversations, it looks pretty boring from the outside. It looks like sending the message you've been drafting and deleting for 2 days. It looks like saying, even in a slightly shaky voice, hey, can we talk about something? It looks like staying in your seat for one more uncomfortable beat instead of changing the subject the second things get tense. Think of it less like leaping off a cliff and more like stepping into a slightly cold pool on the first warm day of the year. The anticipation is almost always worse than the actual sensation. You stand at the edge, you're dreading it, your toes are curling against the tile, and then you're in the cold water, and your body adjusts within about 10 seconds, and you find yourself thinking, that's it? That's what I was so worked up about? Most hard conversations are exactly like that pool. The dread, the standing at the edge, the wringing your hands beforehand. It just feels enormous, completely out of proportion, though, to what actually happens. The actual conversation is almost always shorter and calmer and way less catastrophic than the version that was playing on a loop in your head the night before. So let's get practical about this because I don't want to leave you just with a feeling. I want to leave you with a doorway and the confidence to actually walk through that doorway. So here's a simple structure that I use with clients, and the exact one that I used with that client I mentioned to you, the one that I use myself before conversations that make my stomach do that little flip. Because truly, after all these years, it still sometimes does. It's not that this is always perfect and you always feel like it's the easiest, most natural thing in the world. Not at all. And again, that's just your system saying, ooh, this is important to me. But it's not a sign necessarily to stop. So here's what it is. Step one, name your intention to yourself before you go in. Ask yourself, what do I actually want to come out of this conversation? Not, I want to vent. Venting is not a good reason. Not, I want them to feel bad because I felt bad. That's also not a good reason. It's something more like, I want to create clarity here, or I want this working relationship to function well here, or I want them to have the information that they need to do their very best because I genuinely want them to succeed. Knowing your real intention, that's going to keep you steady when the conversation gets a little uncomfortable, if it does, because you're anchored to a purpose rather than just reacting in the moment to whatever comes back at you. So that's step one. Step two is open with the relationship, not with the issue, not with the quote complaint that you have, the concern that you have. And that one sentence, that's going to change the entire emotional temperature of a hard conversation. I'm bringing this up because I value you, because I value working with you, because I value our working relationship, and I think we can do even better together. Something like that. The words that work for you, but those are a couple of options. You're not softening the message here, and you are definitely not bearing the message here. You are contextualizing it here. You are telling them before you say the tough part that this conversation is coming from a place of investment, not attack. That distinction is going to change how the next sentence lands. Now it's time for step three. This is where you're going to say the actual thing. You're going to say it clearly. You're going to not use 15,000 qualifiers wrapped around it like packing tape. And this is where most people lose their nerve, right at the goal line. We get all the way to the actual point, and then we bury it under so much cushioning that the message never really lands. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I sort of wondered if possibly, or you can totally disagree with this, but you get to drop all that and just say it. And you say, I noticed that X happened and I see it affecting Y. And I wanted to bring it to you directly because I'd rather you hear it from me than figure it out in some other way. Clear is kind. That kind of clarity is kindness. Vagueness, actually, ironically, is much less kind because it leaves the other person guessing at what you actually mean. And guessing is exhausting. And it's often worse than just hearing the direct version. Step four, once you said it, pause. Pause. After you say the thing, resist the powerful urge that you will feel to immediately fill the silence with more words, softening and explaining and apologizing for having even brought it up. Just let it land. Let them respond. The silence feels almost unbearable for about 4 seconds. And then it becomes part of the conversation again. Two people talking the way it was before you said the hard part. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. Avoiding a hard conversation always feels like the safer choice in the moment. It almost never is. Not really. Not when you look at the full balance sheet. The discomfort of having a conversation is real, but it is temporary. A few uncomfortable minutes, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, the way it was for my client. The discomfort of avoiding it compounds. It compounds in the background for weeks, for months, sometimes, as we saw, 18 months or more. You're not protecting the relationship by staying silent. You're slowly starving it of one of the actual things that keeps it alive, and that's honesty. And now you're paying the price over and over again, months and months and months, maybe years. The relationship is paying the price. In some ways, they are paying the price as well. There's some kind of an impact happening. And every time you choose the harder path, the more honest path, the way Indra Nooyi seemed to choose instinctively, the one that my client chose after the 18 months of avoiding it, you're not just solving the immediate problem, you're building a reputation. A reputation as someone who could be trusted with the truth, which at every level you're trying to reach is one of the single most valuable reputations a person can carry into a room. So here's your homework. Think of one conversation that you've been avoiding. You already know which one I'm talking about. It came to the mind the second I said that sentence, didn't it? That's not a coincidence. That's your own version of the conversation tax already accruing. This week, take the first step. You don't have to have the entire conversation today. You just have to take the first step. Send a message asking for 15 minutes of their time. Put it on the calendar. Write down the opening line, even if you don't share it yet. Use the structure that we just walked through. Your intention first, then open with the relationship. Say the actual thing clearly without the packing tape. Let the silence breathe once you've actually said it. And when you're sitting there afterward, a little relieved and a little proud of yourself, I hope, the way that she was, that's the feeling that I want for you, that relief, that sense of, I did it. I did it. You're not going to feel great because it was easy, but you're going to feel good because the harder, truer thing, that's what you did. And it cost you 20 minutes instead of 18 months.